The Darkangel by Meredith Chapter 5 Prince Irrylath. So Ariel told the Darkangel tales, and fed his gargoyles, and spun and wove for his wives, and fished with the Darrow in the quiet cave pools, and the months passed. She told him all the tales she could remember, ever hearing from Bomba or Eowyn or anyone else she had ever known. The vampire seemed to listen with only half an ear, remarking now and again on some improbability in the tale, but he did listen, and Ariel found no more broken bats or maimed lizards in the garden. But she found herself now, at last, as she began work on the last of the wraith's garments, running short of tales. So she asked the Darrow for tales, and he told her those he could remember from his nursery days in the caves of Aderlan. 12,000 day-months passed, and she told these to the vampire in the deserted reception hall of the castle, and he listened seemingly with no more attention than before. Then came the day she told him the tale of the chieftain's son who had lived in the great palace called Tour of Kings. It was a tale Durna had told her, for Durna had been of the plains folk before she was taken for a slave. Told Ariel the tale while combing out her fine yellow-tinged hair. It was late afternoon, almost dusk in the vampire's castle. The white sunlight streamed like water over the black slate floor. Ariel sat on the floor in the warmth of the sunlight, while the Icarus stood by the window and picked a flower to pieces as she spoke. Ariel said, "This is a tale that Durna once told me, and it is the last tale that I know. She told it to me one fortnight when we were quite alone, to frighten me, and I do not know if it is true. This is the tale. There was once a woman who was a handmaiden to a great chieftain of the plains, and this woman, Durna, had a child of a day-month old when the chieftain's queen bore him a son. But the queen fell ill, and so Durna's child was taken from her that she might nurse the chieftain's son. But Durna mourned the loss of her child and grew to hate the child she nursed. Although she was but a serving woman, she vowed vengeance against the chieftain and bided her time. Now it became clear in the few seasons that the fever had befallen the queen at the birth of her child, had left her barren. So when the child had reached his 5th year of age, the queen and her train undertook a pilgrimage across the desert to consult the priestess of Lawnweary about her barrenness. So the pilgrimage was made to the shrines of Lawnweary across the dry desert, the queen remained in the sacred city for a year, and her son with her. When all the prayers and rituals and anointings were completed, the queen gathered her train and started back across the desert. They had journeyed about 3/4 of their way over the waste of dunes when a great wind sprang up that raised the sand in clouds so thick they hid the stars. The caravan made camp at once to wait out the storm, but it blew all day-month and on into the shade of night. At last their water ran so low they had to break camp and try to reach the next oasis. The wind drove them then, and they wandered far off their course, till it was day again and the storm abated. They found themselves in a rocky place at desert's edge, amid a maze of canyons on the shores of a great shallow lake. But something was amiss. The queen saw this at once, for nothing grew along the banks of this mere, or in it. A lonely howling as of jackals could be heard faintly from the canyons, though not a living creature was to be seen, and when the desert wind blew, not a ripple marred the dark water's surface. It lay still like a mirror and barren. Those camels that had been allowed to drink sickened and died. The queen ordered at once that no water skins be filled at this waterhole, and no one was to drink. They would move on. They wandered many hours in the gorges and the canyons, and found themselves at the lake again. A second time they went into the rocks, and after much meandering found themselves emerging on the lake. Once more they entered the maze, and when this time they again emerged onto the mere, there were mutterings among the people and talk of witchcraft. Camp was made, and the council held to determine what was to be done. Truly, it seemed, the gods were displeased. The queen's priests began to cast the oracle bones to divine the cause. It was a lengthy process, and lasted many hours, for the lots were confounded, and there was no magic in the counters. The water was all gone by now, the animals dying, and no one dared drink the water of the wide, still lake. No one drank, that is, but Dirna. Her thirst became so great that at last it overcame her fear, and she crept down to the water in the dark of the night. And while in the distance the unseen jackal sang, she lay down on the sandy bank and cupped her hands to the water. It was cold, colder than shadow, but she drank a handful, and was just reaching for another when she saw something in the water. It was a small creature no bigger than a hen, with smooth, translucent skin that seemed purple in the starlight. At first she thought it must be a huge salamander or a toad, but then it spoke to her in a deep gravel voice and said, "What are you doing trespassing on my mistress's land?" "What are you?" cried Dirna, "and what do you want?" "I am a mudlick," said the hideous creature, "and I want to know why you are Mudlick does my voice in. "I am a mudlick," said the hideous creature, "and I want to know why you are trespassing here." "I was thirsty," said Dirna. "We are lost." "We," the mudlick said. "Are there more of you?" "Yes," Dirna told him. There is the Queen's whole train. Have you not seen them?" "No," said the mudlick. "I can only see those things that drink the water you have drunk, and thus can see me." "You told me you came to slake your thirst. What of the others?" "We wish to leave." "That is not possible," said the mudlick. "You have chosen to trespass here, so here you must remain." "We did not choose. A windstorm drove us here." "That was not my doing." "But you must let us go," said Dirna. "You must." "That I will not," said the mudlick, and turned as if to swim away. "But we will die," said Dirna. "I expect you will," replied the mudlick. "Our water is all gone." "I do not care." And with that the mudlick began to depart. "Oh, please," Dirna besought him. "I shall do anything you ask. Only let us escape." There is nothing any of you could do for me. I do not need anything from you." Don't go, Dirna exclaimed. "Is there nothing to be done to make you save us?" The mudlick wagged his head and started to dive under the dark glassy surface, when abruptly he stopped. He folded his hands across his shiny chest and trod water for a moment, as if listening to the far-off jackal's song. Then he turned around. "There is one thing, perhaps," he said. "What is it?" begged Dirna. "Tell me." "Well," said the mudlick, "my mistress is fond of young boys. Have you any in your train?" "One," said Dirna. "There is one." "How old is he?" inquired the mudlick. "He is 6," the nurse replied. Mused the mudlick. "She likes them younger, babes in arms if possible, but I suppose he will do. Who has charge of him?" "I." "Very well. Bring him down to the water and drown him. Then I shall let you go." Dirna drew back from the creature a little. "His mother will never consent. She is the queen." The mudlick shrugged. "As you please," he said. "I only thought to do you a kindness. I suppose he really is too old for my mistress's liking." "I shall do it in secret," Dirna said. "I shall tell her the thirst fever took him, and he went to the lake and fell in." "Tell her the water which took him," said the mudlick. "Then she will think you have the fever too, and no one will blame you." Then the mudlick swam off, and Dirna returned to the camp. She slipped into the prince's tent where the boy lay sleeping. There she roused him from his cushions and told him to come out to the lake, that there was something great and wonderful to see, but they must make no noise so as not to wake the others. The young prince went with her, wilfully enough, for though she had never been very kind to him, she had never given him any reason to distrust her. So well the distant jackals cried and keened, the two stole out of the camp and down to the lake where the mudlick waited. "See," said Durna, pointing, "there it is." "There what is?" said the prince. "I see nothing." "Lean closer," Durna urged him. "Now do you see?" "No," said the prince. "What must I look for?" "You must lean closer still, then," Durna told him. "You will know it when you see it." "But I see nothing," said the prince, leaning so far forward his face almost touched the water. "Closer," said Durna, and this time, when he leaned, craning to see what she was pointing at, the nurse shoved him hard, so that he fell from the bank and into the lake. Without so much as a cry, the jackals called. Durna stood watching to see if he would come to the surface, but the water closed over him with hardly a ripple. Then Durna ran back to camp as quickly as she could and burst into the queen's tent, staring wildly and clutching her throat as though she could not breathe. They were a long time getting any sound from her, and for a while that was only shrieks and wails, but finally, between much tearing of her hair and tearing of her cheeks with her nails, she began to babble and rave, and half the time she told them the prince had slipped at the lake's edge, and the other half she swore a water witch had caught him by the hair and pulled him in. Finally she fell into a faint at the queen's feet and could not be roused. Whether the queen believed one or the other of the tales, I do not know, but most people believed the one of the witch. Many said that the witch had claimed her tribute and would let them go now. Camp was hurriedly struck and the camels loaded for travel, but the queen saw none of this, for she had gone to the lake shore to weep for her son. Then, when she returned and saw the caravan ready awaiting, she said, "Let us depart. This is an evil place." And this time they found their way out of the canyons and into the desert once more. They soon came upon clear water and eventually found their way home. Great was the grief of the king when he found his son was dead. The pilgrimage proved fruitless, for the queen was still barren, and at last her husband was obliged to put her aside, and she removed across the sea of dust to Easternice. The chieftain twice remarried 2 young daughters of neighboring rulers, but both died very soon, and neither conceived. Blight came to the land, killing the cattle and crops. People began to say the house of the king was accursed and drifted away. The king grew old before his time, and at last died without heir in a plague year that struck down most of the remaining people. Those who were left fled. There was no one to succeed the king, and no one left to rule over. The servants took what goods they might from the palace and departed. The palace guard rounded up those who were left to sell as slaves. Durna was one of those. She had begun to go blind ever since she had drunk the chill waters of that still, dark lake. Her sight had worsened until now both eyes were covered with a white film, and she saw nothing any more of the things of this world. She was sold to the satrap of the steeps of Touraine, who gave her, along with others who could weave and spin, as a gift to his half-sister when she wed the syndic of my village. It is from Durna that I got this tale. I think perhaps she told it just to frighten me. I do not know if it is true. And we will pause there.